When we look at who we really are, we find that we are not a story. If you ask yourself and really mean it and surrender this quest, who am I? You'll find you are not this identity and you are not in time. You are multidimensional and you are eternal. You are energy, pure consciousness. Stories only exist in time. So when you really begin to understand who you really are, the stories will start to feel foreign. And you want to shed them. It's very illuminating to start to become aware and shed light on the sheer amount of storytelling that we do in our day-to-day lives. It's not even something we're aware of until we're aware of it, if that makes sense. And for many of us, as we learn to become conscious, we do start to shed light or look into the dark recesses of our unconscious to see exactly what has been running the show. Now, I've mentioned this many times, but science has shown that 95% of our thoughts are the same thoughts from the day before. And that can be quite disarming to find out, because that essentially means that all of this ruminating and analyzing and overthinking, the monkey mind, is actually just an auto program. And it's not serving any greater good in our lives. We know that storytelling can be magical, or it can be horrifying, or any kind of range in between. And it's no less when it comes to the types of stories that we are telling ourselves on a daily basis. Now, my background in Neuro Linguistic Programming taught me very early on in the journey that we are basing our lives on a level of perception that is unique to us. We have a lens or a filter in which we look out and see our reality, our world. And no one's lens is the same as the next person's. And this lens is programmed in, dependent on our initial childhood, our belief systems that were installed, and the experiences and memories that make up this kind of past for us, this idea of the past. Now, one thing we learn very quickly in this kind of focus on what perception is we find out that perception can be changed and our reality can be changed as a consequence. And so this is kind of the work that we do as an NLP therapist or coach, is we find out what are the disempowering stories or lens that are covering this person's ability to see, and what can we replace instead? What can we install into that wiring instead of this one that's not working anymore? And we find these disempowering programs through awareness activities such as journaling or recognizing patterns in our lives that just don't feel good and keep bringing us to the same conclusion, which is a range of fear, anger, guilt, sadness, frustration, shame, all of the negative emotions that keep us small and afraid. And so as a coach and counselor, I often will find out, as best I can, the individual's lens of perception. How are they seeing the world? Are they seeing the world as a love story or a horror story? Is it a heartbreak or is it an adventure? There are many different ways that people view the world, and we are not the same as each other when it comes to perception. Even two siblings who grew up together will have a different lens of perception. It's very interesting. So this begs to question, what is the purpose of having narratives or stories in our lives that create these horror experiences or these love stories or, the adventure? What is the purpose of this? Now, if you get to the fundamentals of existentialism and find out and ask these big questions and find out some of the answers through meditation and contemplation, most of us come to the same conclusion, that we are here to expand and to experience ourselves, the creator part of us, the creator self that we are, the higher self. We are to come to the conclusion and the remembering that we are one, that we are one self having an experience in all different angles, all different perceptions, all different lenses. And with that comes delight, comes expansion, comes love, comes all of these beautiful experiences that we experience on the hero's journey. But with all expansion, we require friction. And so that comes with frustration, anger, fear, sadness, loss, grief, all of these lower emotions that we experience that provide that friction or irritation for us to keep moving forward, to not become stagnant. And that's what expansion is. It's growth, it's movement. So again, why do we have these stories? Well, I believe that we have stories because they create beauty in our experience. And we create layers of the simulation, if you like. Layers within layers within layers. And we consistently expand this reality or simulation, and it becomes like a choose your own adventure. And so there are people, I'm sure, who are out there living life through that lens. They see the stories as ways to experience the grand play of life. They see it as a grand play of life, as a simple experience of ourself, the higher self, and they don't become stuck or attached to anything outside of themselves. They remember that they are not a separate thing, but they are no thing. They are all things. They are one. We are one. Now, it is difficult to put that kind of concept into human language. I believe it's something we kind of need to decide that we want to know, and we end up on a journey to finding out in our own way, through our own lens of perception, what that means to us. So it's hard for me to explain that in words. But that is the key there. We have to put out the quest or the question first before our answers and journey and path is revealed. And so the question of what narratives and what stories am I experiencing is an important one. Because when we illuminate the stories that we experience every day, we start to see the adventure or type of story that we're on. Are we going to have a love story? Are we going to have a horror story? Are we going to have a war story? Are we going to have a heartbreak story? Are we going to have an adventure? Are we going to have an art house story? Are we going to have many chapters, different chapters that have creative and expansive experiences? What I tend to focus on in my journey and the journey of my clients is the stories that are disempowering, so that we can let them go. Because it's often these stories that are disempowering, the ones that create the horror stories and the war stories and the struggle stories, that are the ones where the person who's experiencing them actually doesn't realize that they're in a story. They are attached and identified as the character within that story. They don't recognize that they are the pure loving awareness or consciousness creating an expansive experience. Instead, they fall for this idea that they are the small self, that they are just the human, the one with the brain and the body, and they are stuck inside this story. And they don't recognize that they can change the story at any time. And they absolutely believe that they are that character. And I've talked about this many times. They believe that they are that identity, that self-image, that programming. They're not aware it's a program, but they think they're the program. And that leads to immense suffering. And that's often where I meet the person in my service to others. I meet them in this place where they got so stuck in this identity, within this story, within this narrative, that they need help. They need a navigator to help them out of this bubble, this problem bubble. So one of the first things we do is we start to look at the story that they've been identifying with in their lives. Often it starts in childhood where we're in a hypnotic brainwave state up until about the age of 7, where the belief systems are installed, the value systems are installed, the ideas about life and possibility are installed, where traumas are and wounds are experienced. And this becomes that person's identity. And that it starts from there. So it starts very young for most of us, this belief that we are the character in the story. What I find is that there is a way to move out of storyland into a different way of being. We've kind of accustomed ourselves and normalized ourselves into this way of being where storyland is normal, where we have this internal narrative all day long. That little voice is explaining everything around us. It's explaining how we're in a hurry. It's explaining the kind of outfit we need to put on, how we need to look for a certain occasion. It's explaining the kinds of foods that we need to have cooked and the meal time and the prep time and the people we're going to meet. It's explaining all of this well before we actually experience any of this. So these stories actually bring us out into this illusory future world. And this is something that is a big focus when we want to change stories. We need to recognize that stories can only exist in this idea of time. Now, we know that for certain that time is a construct. It actually isn't real. Time is a way for us to organize our thoughts and grasp our reality so that we feel that we are growing and changing and getting older, that we are having a linear experience. Time is something that children don't necessarily naturally understand and don't need. If you look at a child and just watch them for a little bit, they're not aware of time. They are very much present. They haven't yet been taught about depression or fear of the past or thinking about the past, feeling guilty or afraid of something in the past. And they haven't been taught about tomorrow. They might have heard the word tomorrow, but then they're not programmed there yet. Tomorrow is this installation we receive as a program when we generally start to go to school and then on to university or tertiary education. the school systems, these systems teach us about the need to be productive for tomorrow. And so we start to create anxiety in children, younger and younger, because they're now being trained to be thinking about tomorrow. And they're no longer able to be here now. And so we're already beginning a new dialogue, a new story time within that child's life as they get older. And that story is that tomorrow is all that matters, not now. And so we add another layer to the simulation. We're no longer here now. We've added another layer of story. We have to just be thinking about tomorrow. Anxiety is another way of understanding this idea of living in tomorrow. We create a fear of not being ready for tomorrow. So many of us are perpetually living relentlessly in this cycle of tomorrow, filled with fear. And this is just another story that we've believed, and we've taken on as our own. When we look at who we really are, we find that we are not a story. If you ask yourself and really mean it and surrender this quest, who am I? You'll find you are not this identity, and you are not in time. You are multidimensional, and you are eternal. You are energy, pure consciousness. Stories only exist in time. So when you really begin to understand who you really are, the stories will start to feel foreign. And you want to shed them. Now, if you've gone onto the journey into meditation being one of the best ways we can step out of our self-identity and self-image and into the real part of us, the conscious awareness. When we start to practice that, we recognize that it's our thoughts that get in the way and interfere with us being able to be present and to experience that bliss of pure consciousness, pure awareness. It is bliss. But it's our mind, our thinking mind, continuing with the narratives, with the stories. And so it's only when you start to recognize that those stories and that mind is not the real you, that you don't clutch onto it so tightly anymore. And you yearn to experience the stillness of who you really are. And you'll find it gets easier and easier to just surrender those stories, because they're not you. Becomes very peaceful. So if you're at the very beginning of this journey, I hope this helps for you to understand a little bit more. And if you're coming to a place where you're really getting better at just letting go, fully surrendering all the stories and coming back to that oneness, that unity, that awareness, then I would encourage you to recognize and start to ask your awareness to show you all the storytelling that you do during your waking hours when you're not meditating. There's so many blind spots that are to be revealed on this journey. And there's always more opportunities to surrender and let go of stories. This is what having a quiet mind is. And the beauty of this process is your heart begins to be the lead, the master in your life. Because all these stories are louder sometimes than our heart. We don't attune to our heart because we're listening to the stories instead. We want our hearts to be the GPS system in our lives. Our hearts are the antenna to pure source energy, to pure consciousness. And that pure consciousness is who you really are. So we need to open our hearts, quieten the mind, and stop telling stories. And enjoy the peace and that bliss that comes from communing with who you really are. So I want to encourage you to let go of the stories, all of them. Become like a child in wonder and awe without labeling anything and see what happens. And if you're worried about turning into something that doesn't function in this world, don't be. You'll be amazed the intelligence of the heart guiding you through this life without so many stories. I hope this has been helpful. Have a beautiful day. Bye.